As you've seen, no doubt, Antonio Cardenas-Rico has been cleared of any charges. His attorney and the man say that he was arrested hastily. How do you address that? I mean, when you got a situation like this?
That's simply wrong. Antonio Cardenas-Rico was arrested by members of the Gwinnett County Police Department based on evidence that had been gathered in an investigation that included statement of the victim as well as cell phone evidence that put his location near the murder scene, as well as other evidence that put him in the area at the time. He, based on the initial information, had a motivation, and actually when he was arrested, he was not nearly as truthful as he wants you to believe today. And so I think the police had sufficient evidence to go forward. They acted judiciously, and it was only when they absolutely exonerated him, which I happened to be present for at 1:30 in the morning on Saturday morning, that we moved as quickly as we could by me signing a dismissal and the police delivering it to the judge to dismiss charges against him, dismiss the murder charge against him. So I know he doesn't particularly like his circumstance, but the police, I cannot give a high enough commendation to the work of the homicide detectives and the SIS folks, or the drug squad folks, and the crime scene people from the time of the incident on Tuesday night at 6:30 until the final disposition sometime around 2 o'clock in the morning on Saturday morning. It was a constant search for the truth, and this police department deserves tremendous credit.
And I think that's the important thing to get across, George. You know, they made the arrest based on what the witness had said, what other people's information, but it was their hard work that ultimately led to dismissing these charges. You know, again, it doesn't address the drug charges that he's in jail for too, but you know, the bottom line is they worked as hard to make sure they had the right suspect, and great, just great police work.
Danny, we saw you Friday night when you did the research of the home and the area.
Well, the police, I was there as a
as well as the police investigator.
The police actually
and it was
did
actually there. I saw that. So I'll give credit where credit is due. But what was found in the research of the house? You mentioned fibers you were looking at.
Well,
you mentioned,
I can't go into the specifics of it, but the actual execution of the search warrant at the Bridle Path residence gave us significant evidence that disproved Elvis Noe Garcia's version of the events, and it had to do with the point of entry. It also had to do with the locations of the victims, which were pointed out by a witness. So we executed that search warrant to check the veracity of his story as part of the ongoing investigation. In the meantime, there were other investigative actions going on that were basically checking the story of Antonio Cardenas-Rico in his claim that he was not present. And as a result of that, we were able to gather videotape evidence that showed him at a location at approximately the time of the murder, as well as we were able to explain the cell phone pings because of the proximity of his residence would be a legitimate reason for him to be there, and it was based on that we exonerated.
Where was he at the time of the murder?
He was in the area of Highway 124 and Sugarloaf Parkway in several different locations, which we verified through video, commercial video, as well as ATM photographs, as well as cell phone records.
Restaurant or a bar?
Store, there was an ATM, there was a store, there was a gas station, and we discovered through the course of the investigation that he in fact lives in that area also, so he was at his residence.
Can any of you talk about the nature of Mr. Garcia stabbing himself, apparently?
There was suspicion. I can only say that early on in the investigation, as early as Wednesday morning, there was some suspicion by medical personnel, and as well as an examination of the photographs by the medical examiner that gave some indication that the wounds may possibly be self-inflicted, and that was one of the things that was being pursued. As part of the ongoing investigation.
So he indeed did stab himself.
His wounds appear to be consistent with self-inflicted stabbing.
Danny, is that what sort of turned you to the idea that maybe you weren't getting the whole truth initially?
Well, you got to remember, it turned the detectives to that because my office learned of all this at a meeting Thursday afternoon, but that was one of the things that made the work continue. They were pretty satisfied that it didn't end there.
Danny, are you looking for the death penalty on this one?
It's really too early to consider it, but based on the nature of the crime, it's certainly something I'm going to consider.
Was it a superficial wound? Was it a serious?
Andrea, I can't discuss the specifics of it other than to say that it was the opinion of the medical personnel that it was consistent with self-inflicted. So.
Can you comment on one of the criteria for the death penalty has to do with the depravity of mind, I think.
Well, it actually is a B7 aggravator, and it says that the murder involved either torture, aggravated battery, or a depravity of mind. And that's certainly one that we would look at based on the nature of the injuries to the victim. But also we would be looking at this as that the murder occurred during the commission of a capital felony, which would be the other killings, which is, I think, a B3 aggravating circumstance.
Well, one of the more prosaic things that you say in prosecutions is that the defendant has a abandoned and malignant heart.
That's in the murder statute, where his actions show an abandoned and malignant heart, but that's not really related to the death penalty. There they used a depravity of mind, that evidence depravity of mind.
So
What have you
any
found
of those
about
phrases fit here?
Well, I think that's why we're going to wait until all the evidence comes in, because that's one of those things you have to take a look at. What his actions before and after the murder were, what's his background look like, all those other things that we're going to try and be looking at to help make that decision of whether or not to seek the death penalty.
Any indication of that previous police report where Mr. Garcia indicated that Antonio Cardenas-Rico had threatened to kill him was real, or was that made up? And was this, you think, his attempt to set this whole thing up?
The police are still looking into that. There's some conflicting evidence about mutual threats going back and forth that was provided to us by Mr. Cardenas' attorney, but also there's some evidence that was provided by Mr. Garcia's family that indicates that the threats were made. As far as the February 2nd report, I can't say with certainty whether or not those threats occurred, but they weren't friends. And there had been threats going back and forth across the internet. So.
You won't talk about this woman being a girlfriend or what have you. What can you tell us about the relationship that may have been involved in any kind of motive?
I can only tell you that the information that we received is at least Garcia believed they were involved in a relationship.
One last thing on my part. The jail says he found maximum security, Garcia is, and that he's being violent and uncooperative. Does that speak to his frame of mind, and do you know anything about his nature today?
I don't know anything about the conditions of his incarceration. I don't know that it would go to his state of mind unless I knew what he was actually saying or doing. He was disruptive at the hospital, but I'd have to know what he was saying before you make any judgment.
Has anybody found the murder weapon?
Yeah, the murder weapon was at the scene.
And what was that?
It was a knife.
Large, small, can you indicate?
It was a kitchen knife.
You guys had said that the mother of the victims had been cooperating with you. Was she a part of the role in turning this around on her?
I can't really comment on the role of any individual or the specifics of the investigation, so I couldn't really tell you.